So get the most rain, right? When you think about it, it doesn't need any argument. So I'm not going to specify any parameter. Here. And so because we're going to use this array here, so I'm going to close this. We're not going to specify any parameter. Get most rain. What we want to do is first of all, we want to go through the array, right, to find the most rain. Okay, we're going to compare all the elements in the array to find the one that's the most. And so we're going to use the same idea, the same loop here, okay, and the same loop here, basically to go through the array. Actually, this is a bit different. Okay, we're going to use something very similar to this. We're going through the rainfall stat array. That's exactly what we're doing. So I'll make a copy of it. Okay, but I'll change what's in it. Okay, so with this loop, we're going through each element. We're going through the loop basically using the index, okay, to represent each element. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the initial, okay, I'm going to create a variable which is going to be a double, and I'm going to call it most rain, okay, and I'm going to set it equal to the first element, okay, the very first element in the array, in the rainfall stat array. And we know the very first element has an index of 0, and so by you doing this, I'm referring to the very first element in rainfall stat array. And I mean in this rainfall stat array. That's going to be most rain, right? And so what I'm going to do in this loop is, as I'm going through the array with the loop, I'm going to create an if statement, and I'm comparing. I'm saying if, okay, rainfall stat index. Okay, so I'm starting from, so index starts from 0. I'm starting from the first one. I'm asking, is the first element, okay, if the first element is greater than what's already stored in most rain, okay, so this is not necessarily the first element, but if the current element I'm working on, index will start from 0, so that'll be the first element. It will move to 1, that'll be the second element. So I'm asking, as you are going through the array, is this element greater than most rain? If it is, then store that element in most rain, because if it's greater than that in what's already stored in most rain, then store that element in most rain. So store that element in most rain, rainfall stats, at that particular element, because index will refer to the index of that particular element. Okay, and then keep going. So by the time this loop is done, we will have most rain stored here. We'll have it, and then we can go ahead, once we're done with this loop, we can go ahead and return most rain. We can return most rain. Now this would have been nice if the question was asking us to return the most rain, but it's saying it should return the month with the most rain. Okay, so this is what I meant by we are going to change this to now return the month, but we're going to still use all these values, these things, to figure out that month, right? So that's why I wanted you to understand it this way first. All right, okay, so fine. Now we've figured out a way to get the most rain. Okay, but what we actually need is the month with the most rain, not just the most rain. And so let's change the name to get most rain month. Okay, so now we are working our way to make this method, return the most rain, the month with the most rain. So get most rain month. Okay, and we know the month we are going to represent it by numbers: 1 for January, 2 for February, 12 for December, and so on and so forth, right? And so let's change the return type of this method to an int, because that's what we're going to return. And if we're returning an int, then let's get rid of this. We're not going to return the most rain. That's not what we want to return. What we want to return is the month. How do we figure out the month? Basically, once we find the most rain, when you think about it, once you find the most rain, this index, okay, this index is referring to, basically it's referring to, when you think about it, right, the array will have 12 elements, and this index will refer to, over here we're trying to figure out the most rain, right? Most rain, this index is telling us the slot of this most rain, of this most rain value. It's telling us the slot in the array where it is. But when you think about it, this index is also referring to, in terms of month, it's referring to the month, the current month of this most rain. When you think about it, okay, index is referring to the current month. The only thing is indices starts from 0 to 11. We have 12 elements in an array, right? But the index is really starting from 0 to 11. So the very first element, right, which has a rainfall value, has an index of 0. The 12th element has an index of 11. Okay, so this index, we can use this index, right? We just started from 0 to 11. 0 to 11 is representing the month. 0 for January, 1 for February, and so on and so forth. But we don't want it to display 0 to 11, right? We don't want that. We want 1 to 12 month. But actually, the index is actually representing those slots. And those slots are, when you count them, they are 12 elements. But then they are represented with indices of 0 to 11. And so, let's create a variable here. We can use this index value to represent the month. The only difference is that it starts from 0 to 11. Okay, so let's first of all create an integer value and call it most rain month. Okay, so this is what's finally going to store the month of the most rain month. It's going to be represented by an integer. So index is okay. The index is representing the basically the slot, basically our month, right? But then but from 0 to 11. The first month has an index of 0. Second month has an index of 1. December, which is 12, has an index of 11. And so we can use this index, alright, but the only thing is we have to add 1. Because this index is starting from 0 to 11. 0 represents January, or basically represents the first slot. 11 represents the 12th slot. And so we can use this index, but only difference is we have to add 1 to it. Okay, so we can set most rain month to be equal to index, right, plus 1. Because if you just use index, assuming that the most rain is in the first slot, right, or is in let's say the second slot, the index of the first slot is 0. The index of the second slot is 1, right? But the second slot is really February, right? It's really February, but then you have an index of 1. You can't just say 1 because 1 will really mean January. So you have to add 1 to it so that you can, because so indices are represented with from 0 to 11, but in actual sense there are 12 elements, 0 to 11. And so you have to add 1 to it so we can get the most rain. We can get the actual month, because we can't use 0 to represent January. We have to add 1 to it so it says 1. We can't use 11 to represent February. I'm sorry. We can't use 11 to represent December. And so we have to add 1 to it so it can read as 12. So I hope this is clear. I hope I'm not confusing anyone. I hope it's clear. And so now we're done. Remember, so now the method we started, we've changed it like I promised. We've changed it to now become a method that's returned a month based on what we did before. So it's returning an int. And once we're done getting the most month, all we need to do is just return it. So return this time around most rain month. And most rain month is an integer. So now this is getting us the month of the most rain. And later on, based on the value we get from that, we can let it display not the number but in a string. We can do that. All right, so the next thing we have to do is calculate the month with the least rain, and we don't have to do it all over again. We can just make a copy of this and then change it, to represent the opposite. Change the name, to get least rain month. It's going to return an int, so change this to least rain. Set least rain to the first element of the array, rainfall stat array. Right? Yeah. And then int, change this to least rain month. We're going through the array as normal. If rainfall stat index, that's fine. If the current element is not greater than most rain, but less than, if the current element is less than the least rain, if it's less than the least rain, if that the value in that slot, if that rain value, that's in that inches value, which is 57.5 inches, if that value there is less than what's already stored in least rain, okay, then that means that's the smallest. And so store that value, which is this value, the current element here, in least rain, in least rain over here. And then if that's the least rain, this index is representing basically that slot, right? In other words, you can think of it that this index is representing that month, but the only difference is the index represents the month from 0 to 11, right? Actually, so 0 really means the first element, 1 really means the second element, right? And so we have to add 1 to it so we can get a value that actually looks like a month, so we can 0 to 11, 0 really means January, right? But you can't just say month 0 to really means for the 0 to really mean something. We have to add 1 to it so we can read as month 1, which we all understand as January. All right, and then over here now we just set least rain month to be equal to index, right, plus 1. So if the least rain month, if the index was, let's say, 11, which is going to be the last element in the array, index represents the last element in the array. The index of the last element in the array is going to be 11, right? The last element is there are 12 elements, and the last element, which is the 12th element, is going to have an index of 11. And so if that index is 11, we can't just say month 11, because month 11 doesn't really represent December. And so we have to add 1 to it so that it reads as 12, okay, when we return it. Then once we're done, let's return least rain month, like that. Okay, so now we're done with all our methods. We have our get total rainfall, get average rainfall, get most rain month, get least rain month. And then we have our construct that's going to create an object from this class. Given an array, sets the size of that array to set the size of this array to the size of the array that was given when the constructor was called, and then it copies all the elements from the array that was passed into the constructor to this rainfall stats array. Okay. All right. So now we're done with this class. Okay. When I compile this, so let's just create a new folder in chapter 7. So new folder called chapter 7, and then save this here as rainfall.class .java. I'm sorry. Let's see if we have any errors, and we do. Public rainfall. Let's see. Did I do anything wrong here? Let me compare the curly braces. Sometimes it doesn't match. And it's true, it doesn't match. Yeah, I think I ended up, maybe when I was copying some of the methods, I ended up deleting it. So, I know it does match. I'm sorry. It does match. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it needs the keyword. It needs the keyword class. Okay, and I'm sure some of you saw this. I know. It needs a keyword class because really what I'm creating is a class. So public class, okay, rainfall. I'm sure some of you got confused because public rainfall doesn't really necessarily, unless you're trying to create a constructor, this doesn't really make sense, right? And so we are trying to create a class. So public class rainfall. Okay, so compile. Then now we have another error which says variable most rain month might not have been initialized. Okay, so it just needs an initial value. So this is the get most rain month method, and it's saying that the most rain month is not initialized. It needs to know its initial value. Let's set it to, okay, the very first month, which is 1, right? And so if another month has a most rainfall, it's going to override it over here. It's going to override it. If only another month has the most rainfall is greater than the current most rainfall, then replace the most rainfall with that month. Otherwise, keep it at the first month. Okay. So yeah, that's what's going to happen. So if you have an array with all let's say all the values of let's say all 2s, then the first month is going to have the most. It's going to start with the very first value you get. But if you have the first element being 2, the second element being 3, as soon as it gets to 3, it will realize that 3 is greater than 2, and so it will override the most main month value with that particular month. Okay, so most rain month will be overwritten or be replaced with another value. Same thing for this. It's going to complain for the least rain month. So let's just set that to 1, 2, and compile this. And then now we're done with our rainfall class. Okay, so all right. So sorry if I maybe over-explained. For some of you, I'm sure you know it, but if you know it and it's I'm over-explaining it, please feel free to skip through it. Okay, but I'm doing this so that everyone gets it. And if you don't know and it's helping, then great. All right, but if you know, feel free to skip through it too. All right, so this is a class. We're going to now create a program that's going to test this class, because it says over here, demonstrate the class in a complete program, and we're going to create that program separately. And as long as those two files are in the same folder, they should be able to find each other. If you don't put them in the same folder, you'd have to specify the path to where the class is. You have to specify the path to where the class is to the program that is going to test the class, so that it can find the class and use it. And so I'm going to create another file. Let me make a copy of the question first, so we can refer to the question on this page too. And then I'll create the class here. So public class, and I'll call this rainfall test. This is going to be the program that's going to test the rainfall class. And so I'm going to create my main method, a string array called args. Okay. All right. And so over here it says demonstrate the class in a complete program. Input validation, do not accept negative numbers for monthly rainfall figures. So this tells me that we are going to accept inputs from the user, right? And so let's use one of Java's features for accepting user input. It's been a while since I used the J option pane, so let's use that. Let's use the J option pane. I think I used kind of in the last 2 or 3 programs. So let's use the J option pane in this one. And to use the J option pane, we have to import it. So I'm going to import the class, the J option pane class. So import javax.swing.J option pane. All I'm doing over here is I'm importing the J option pane class located in the javax.swing package in the Java API. Now with the J option pane, you don't have to declare an object. You can just go ahead and use the methods in the class. And so what I want to do in main, first of all, you know what, before that, let's create a method. Okay, let's create a method that's going to ask the user to enter values to fill the array. That method is going to accept an array as an argument, and it's going to ask the user to basically type in the monthly rainfall values to fill the array. Okay, so above the main method. Okay, you can also create it below the main method. I like to create mine above the main method and then have the main method last. And so I'm going to create a method. I'm going to call it, so it's going to be public static void main. Oh, did I just say main? I'm sorry. I just basically did this again. All right, so public static void. This is the return type. Right? We know this method is not going to return anything, so that's why I set the return type to void. Okay, meaning it's not going to return anything. Now I need to specify the name of the method. I'll call it. It's going to be a long name, okay? But if you don't like it, make yours short. I don't mind long names at all. If you've been watching my videos, I'm sure by now you know that I like long names. So I'll call this fill array with user details. That's what I'll call the method. I mean, it's not too bad. I've named variables longer than this, so this is not too bad at all to me. Anyway, change it to something short if you're not comfortable with it. So this method is going to, let me just have the closing parentheses, the closing curly brace. This method is going to accept an array, and so I'm going to define a parameter. I'm going to define a parameter for the array that this method is going to accept, and I'm going to call this parameter, well, we know it's going to be a double array, right? So it's going to take in an array. Okay, you can think of it as an empty array. Basically, it's going to be an empty array, and then it's going to, actually, it's not going to, no, it's not going to be, well, it's going to be empty, but then the size is going to be defined. Okay, so the array is going to be empty, but then the size is going to be defined as, okay, this array is going to take in 12 elements before it's passed into this method. So it's going to take in a double array, and I'm going to call it rainfall stats. It doesn't matter if this name is the same as the name in the class. Now, they are in two different classes, so in the first place, they don't even see each other. This rainfall stats, the scope of this rainfall stats is in this file, in this program. It doesn't matter if this rainfall stats is the same thing here. Okay, these are considered two different names or things, okay, entities, because they are in two different classes, okay, and two different methods. You can think of it, that way. All right, so it's going to accept in a rainfall stats array, and all this method is going to do is it's going to go through the array, okay, and ask the user to fill in the array until it's full. Okay, so I'm going to create a for loop like we did in the class to go through the array. The array will already have a size defined in main, and so for int index is equal to 0, as long as the index is less than the array that's, well, hold on, I should call this, yeah, it's fine, I'll call it, you know what, maybe I shouldn't call it rainfall stats, so that it doesn't confuse you. I'll just say, I'll call this array given, just so you know that an array is going to be given. Okay, so fill array with details, an array is going to be given, and so we're going to go through that array that's given. Set index to 0, as long as index is less than the array that's given. Okay, dot length. Okay, so remember if the index is less than the array's length, okay, then that's a valid index. But any index above the array's length is outside. You're going outside the range of the array, and so we're just making sure that index is always less than the array's length. And we can use those values to represent the elements in the array. And so set index to 0, as long as index is less than the array given, it's array given's length. Do what's in the loop, and before you come back up and check to see if index is less than the array given length, add 1 to index. So basically, this is basically going to go through, use the index. It's basically specifying it's going to make sure that we have valid index, valid indices to go through the array. Okay. In actual sense, we are if we are using the indices, then this is basically going through the array. Okay, so we are using the indices and as values to go through the array. Okay. All right, so the indices will be values that we're going to use to represent each element in the array. Okay. All right, so what this method is going to do is it's going to, let's see, so we have the job option pane here. An array is going to be given. We're going through the array. We want to ask the user, okay, we want to ask the user to enter a value for the first slot. So we can use the job option pane. So I'm going to call the job option pane's show inputs dialog. So job option pane dot show input dialog. And that's basically going to pop up some kind of dialog box with a text box, okay? And it's going to allow the user to type in something, but before it's going to display what I type in here as an argument. So I'm going to type in, please enter rainfall figures or rainfall inches. I guess it's in inches. I'll just say figures for month. I'm going to concatenate it with index. Now we know index is going to start from 0. So basically the index is just like I was explaining here, that we have to add 1 to it. Okay, the index is starting from 0 to 11. It's basically the indices are representing the month. Okay, all the 12 months. The first month is represented with index 0. Second month, index 1. The 12th month is represented with index 11. And so index is basically, we can use index to basically keep track of our months. But the only thing is it's being displayed from 0 to 11. And so really the index 0 is really the month 1. The index 11 is really the month 12. And so we could use this value to represent our month, but then to display it so we can see it, we can add 1 to it. And so index starts off as 0, right? But it's going to display, please enter rainfall figures for month 0 plus 1, which is 1. And that's true. If we get to the last element, which has an index of 11, it's going to say, please enter rainfall figures for month 11 plus 1, which is 12. And that makes sense, right? So starting from 1, if we add 1 here, it's basically going to display it as month 1 to 12. Okay, so it's going to say, please enter rainfall figures for month 1, and then in month 2, month 3, and so on. Now once it asks this user, this statement asks the user to type in something, it's going to allow the user to type in something. All right, the user is going to type in something. Whatever the user types is going to be returned as a string. Okay, so even if the user types in a number, okay, whatever that number is going to be returned as a string. That's how the job option panes show input dialog works. Whatever you type in, even if it's a number, it's going to be returned as a string. And so first things first, I'm going to declare a string variable. I'm going to call it user input string to store whatever is returned by the job option panes show input dialog. The thing is, we don't want a string. We need a value, a number to store in the array. A string wouldn't really work, okay? Because we declare this array, this array is going to store doubles and not strings. And so we need to find a way to convert this user input string. Okay, although if the user enters a number, this number is going to be returned here. Sorry about the beep. This number is going to be returned here as a string. So we need to convert it to, in this case, a double. And we can use one of Java's wrapper classes to do that. Okay, so it's double.pass double. And what are we passing to a double? We're passing the content of user input string. Okay, into a double. We are passing the contents of user input string into a double, and once this is done, it's going to return the contents of user input string converted to a double, right? It's going to return it, and when it's returning it, we need a place to store it. And so I'm going to come up here and define a double value and call it user rainfall. Call it user monthly rainfall figure. Okay, it's a long name, right? But it's fine. It makes sense. User monthly rainfall figure. Okay, and so once it converts whatever is stored in the user input string to a double, we need a place to store it. So I now have a double value here, which is going to store the contents or whatever the user typed converted to a double. Okay, and I'm going to store it in user monthly rainfall figure. Okay, and then once I'm done, okay. Well, I think let's finish with the program, okay, and then after we'll work on input validation, just so I don't confuse you here. Okay, so now once we have, assuming the user type in the correct values, once we have the monthly rainfall, what we want to do is we want to set, because we want to fill the array, right? And so we have the array given, array has been given to us here, and so I want to say array given that index, that element is going to be equal to the user monthly rainfall figure. And so next index starts from 0. Once the user types in the values, the array given's first slot is going to be whatever they typed the first time, and it's going to say enter figures for month 2, and then array given, see, index will be 1 here, so array given 1, okay, is going to be equal to the second thing the user typed, and then so on and so forth. So by the time this is done, this array will be filled. The array that we're going to define in main will be filled. In main over here will be filled.